All right, so which country is the biggest threat to democracy? Well, according to a new poll commissioned by the Alliance of Democracies Foundation, it's neither China or Russia. So who could it possibly be? RT's Alex Mihailovich has that answer.
Land of the free, home of the brave, and now the world's biggest threat to democracy.
America's on the move again. We're choosing hope over fear, truth over lies, light over darkness. And we're working again. We're dreaming again. We're discovering again. And we're leading the world again. And you're proving democracy can deliver for the people.
And it's that delivering of democracy that scares a lot of people around the globe. In a poll known as the Democracy Perception Index, which is commissioned by the Alliance of Democracies Foundation and was conducted by the Latana Polling Company between February and April, 50,000 people in 53 countries were asked which country threatens democracy in their country. Nearly half of the respondents who took the survey named the U.S. as the greatest threat, while fear of Chinese influence came in at 38% and Russian at 28%. It is not surprising that the countries which showed as overwhelmingly negative about U.S. influence include Russia and China. And there may be a reason for that.
American leadership must meet this new moment of advancing authoritarianism, including the growing ambitions of China to rival the United States and the determination of Russia.
However, European democracies also stood out as overwhelmingly negative about U.S. influence, with German sentiment being particularly high. Globally, 81% of people polled said that it is important to have democracy in their country. But just over a half, 53%, said that their country is actually democratic today, even in democracies. So, who actually believes that they live in a democracy? Those polled in Denmark, Switzerland, and Norway are most confident that their countries are democratic. And what may be a surprise to many, so are people in China, where 71% say that their country has the right amount of democracy. As for what is perceived as the biggest threat to democracy, economic inequality was the #1 choice at 64%. At 48%, just under half of the people in the survey also cited big tech as a threat, with Americans being most concerned about that issue at 62%. The chair of the Alliance of Democracies Foundation, former NATO chief and Danish Prime Minister, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, said, "This poll shows that democracy is still alive in people's hearts and minds. We now need to come out of the COVID-19 pandemic by delivering more democracy and freedom to people who want to see their countries become more democratic." Rasmussen might have missed an important point in the survey, and that is that the participants made it quite clear that they don't want democracy delivered to them, but instead would rather see more equality in the world to make things more democratic. The Democracy Perception Index survey has been conducted since 2018 by Latana and the Alliance of Democracies. It is the world's largest annual study on how people perceive democracy. For RT, I'm Alex Mihailovich.
And for more on this, we'll bring in our panel to discuss former UK MP George Galloway and New York Times bestselling author, president of the Phylllis Schlafly Eagle Forum, Ed Martin. Gentlemen, good to see you again. First, 53 countries, 53,000 participants. When asked about a number of issues threatening democracy, I think agree or disagree, the biggest agree was on economic inequality. Most people surveyed agreed about that. But when asked what country threatens democracy the most between the U.S., China, and Russia, the respondents agreed the U.S. was the bigger threat. So what do you say to that, George?
The Scottish national poet Robert Burns said, "The greatest gift that God could give us is to see ourselves as others see us." And that, I think, will have come as a big shock to some people in the United States, how others see you. You see, when Joe Biden's up there, somewhat hesitantly, because of his advancing whatever it is, telling us America's on the move again, the rest of us are hiding under the table, Manila. The idea that America's on the move again and coming our way is not something that we look forward to. Look, the United States has invaded and occupied some 60 countries since the Second World War, overthrown governments and presidents, even killed some. And in that, you've taken over from us. That's what we used to do. And that's why I think if there was a second place after Russia and China, Britain might have come up quite high on that list too.
Yeah, Ed, I'll let you respond.
Well, I want to quote, first I want to rise in defense of America and quote the old George M. Cohan in Yankee Doodle Dandy, over there, the Yanks are coming, over there. You know, what we had in the last 4 years is a president who finally turned the American party system away from wars, away. We're seeing it right now. We're playing Liz Cheney, one of the Cheney family, is being forced out of politics because the American people agree with the world that our ideas that we were going to plant democracy in other places, it wasn't just imperialism, it was stupidity. But I mean, you know, that poll to me smacks of what the Europeans like to do when they like to talk about what's a threat, who's a threat, and here comes the big bad wolf that's a threat. I will say this, the one purveyor of the threat to democracy in the world is a three-letter word, and it's CNN. When you watch CNN in every airport and hotel in Europe or in Asia or in America, you see fake news like we've never seen. You see racial strife and rioting. America is doing great in many ways. The inequality economically and inequality of education is a problem. But here's the great news. I think the news is that we're all starting to agree. Big tech, big media, and big government are bullying the basics of the American vision, and that's what most people want in the world is more, not the American system, but the vision of more freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of association. So, but I'm not surprised at the survey results because I think really CNN and big tech does so much damage to everyone.
Ed, I'm going to stick with you on this one. I'll give you the first crack. What about democracy in the time of COVID? Those surveyed seem to agree that what their governments, their respective governments have done during the pandemic eroded democracy, limiting freedoms.
Well, I think that's right. I think there was a lot of fear, but you know, and people, fear is one of the greatest and most dangerous motivators in politics, and we've seen it in history, and we've seen it in the last year. And look, in America, we've had feckless leaders under Trump and under Biden. It continues. Scientists who say they know everything, and then they turn out to know very little. But the fear is a real problem. But again, I would go back to the damage that, you know, and RT America in the United States plays a role. And actually, people tell me all the time, they let people talk. You actually have a discussion. Our news here is just about fear-mongering. The model of American cable news is fear, 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 pharma commercial, fear, 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 pharma commercial, and they make them, by the way, Fox News does it too. And the question is, after a year of that, we have mostly a brainwashed nation that is fearful. So that part of democracy is failing. But then again, you know, we muddle through this. And in America, we're seeing more and more Americans take control of their lives instead of letting bureaucrats dominate.
George, what about that? Has your country stifled your democracy?
Well, it depends, you see. In an existential threat situation, like, say, the Second World War, when Hitler was at the Channel ports in France and ready to invade us, everyone was behind the government, behind the state, and they trusted what the state said. Our problem now is that when our governments tell us that it's sunshine outside, we go to the window to check that they're not lying. And I think that's true in your country too. Both of our states and many others have lost the trust, the credibility with the people. So when they say you have to wear a mask, you have to get a jab, you have to show that you have had that jab, and so on. If people really trusted their government, which they do in the much maligned China, then people do it because they feel that their government is on their side. The problem is, in our countries, many people feel the government is not on their side, and they're not wrong about that.
Yes, and
it's true.
And this survey also revealed, specifically here in the U.S., that 62% of Americans fear the power of big tech and social media. Is that any surprise to you, George?
Well, I think the American people have shown great perspicacity there, because that is the biggest looming threat to democracy in Western countries. The power of a tiny number of oligarchs to shut even the President of the United States of America was closed down by a handful of unelected billionaires, and has not as yet resurfaced. I don't know if Donald Trump is alive or dead. I haven't set eyes on him since January. Well, once I saw him every day, all day. That's the power of big tech, of big media. This is like Rowan and Martin's laughing. Ed and I are very different people, but on that, we're on the same mark.
Ed, what about that?
Well, I want to frame up, closing. You quoted Burns. Let me quote Twain. You know, reports of my death are greatly exaggerated. That's what Donald Trump said. I think he's kicking hard. No, let me say it very clearly. Listen to this. Watch what happens. How big tech dominates. Hillary Clinton spends 4 years saying the 2016 election was stolen. That's what she said. Illegitimate, based on Russia, Russia, Russia. All the proof said no. Donald Trump said the election was irregular, and big tech shuts him down and takes away Twitter and Facebook and everything else. You don't have to pick what side you like to recognize that power. And big tech, I call it the narrative machine. Big tech and big media with big government behind it. We've never seen anything like this that's happening in the world. And in America, we're feeling it every day. We get chased hither and thither by George Floyd and Liz Cheney and everything else. Meanwhile, the fundamentals of our country, immigration, education, and all, are falling to pieces. And so the narrative machine is dominating democracy. I'm not sure it's a democracy if it continues the way it's going.
Absolutely. I think we can, all three of us, agree on that one. George Galloway, Ed Martin, good to see you gentlemen again. Thank you.